The phone rang at 3:17 on a rainy Thursday, the kind of thin, buzzing ring that makes your chest go tight even before you pick up. I had just poured a second cup of coffee, one I didn't need, and I was standing at the kitchen window watching the gutters spit water onto the hydrangeas. "Mrs. Whitaker?" a woman said, breathless. "Your daughter, she?" She fell down the stairs. There was a pause before the word fell, not even a full second, but my ear caught it the way a mother always does. I pressed the phone to my cheek. "Where?" I asked. The caller said the house. She said the ambulance was already on the way to St. Mary's ER. She gave me our address like I might not know it. I set the coffee down without drinking. It left a small brown ring on the counter I still haven't wiped up. My keys were in the shallow blue bowl by the door. My raincoat, on the hook. I didn't feel myself put them on. What I remember is the sound of the refrigerator kicking on, the rubber creak of my garden clogs, and the way my hands shook as I scrolled to call my son-in-law, Eric. I hesitated. If the ambulance was on the way, why hadn't he called me first? The drive to the hospital took 12 minutes, though the lights and the wet streets made it stretch. I kept noticing small things, as if my body refused to take in the big one, the tremor in my blinker, the paper gas station receipt crumpled by the gearshift, the taste of the coffee I didn't drink still ghosting my tongue. Twice I told myself to breathe. Once I said my daughter's name out loud, as if she could hear me through the rain. Inside St. Mary's, the air was too cold and smelled like lemon cleaner and old coffee filters. The waiting room TV showed a game show with the sound off, people smiling too hard in bright clothes. I found the registration desk. A young man with a raised collar and a shy voice asked for my name, then my daughter's. He typed. "She's being evaluated," he said, not meeting my eyes. "They're doing imaging." "Was she alone?" I asked. He swallowed. "No, ma'am. Her husband brought her in." That word snagged like a nail. Brought. I pictured Eric's gray sedan slewing up to the curb. I pictured his careful hands, his mild face, the way he always offered to carry in groceries and remembered to open the porch umbrella for me when the sun was bad. The perfect son-in-law, everyone said. I had believed it for so long that even my doubt felt like betrayal. They handed me a visitor sticker to wear on my cardigan. The sticker was crooked. My fingers wouldn't smooth it. While I waited, a nurse slid a clipboard across the counter. "Intake forms, insurance, consent to treat, emergency contact. We'll just need you to confirm some details," she said. The top page showed my daughter's name, her birth date, our address. The date and time were printed in the corner, 3:09 p.m. 8 minutes before my phone rang. I felt a ridiculous wave of relief at the precision of it, something solid to hold. Then I saw the bottom line, signature of accompanying adult. It was neat, practiced, Eric Whitaker. I stared at it so long the letters blurred. I carry a lot of small memories. The kind you don't think will ever matter, like how, on birthday cards, Eric always signed with a looping E that fell below the line. And he penned the K in Whitaker with a little upward tick at the end, like he was making a check mark. This one had the loop, yes, and the tick, but something about the spacing was off, too even, like he'd been careful not to touch the printed box's lines. I told myself I was grasping. People sign differently when they're scared. People write neater when they're standing up at a counter. "Mrs. Whitaker?" The nurse's voice was kind. "They'll update you as soon as they can." I nodded, but my eyes were on the timestamp again, sharp as a pin in the corner of the page. 3:09 p.m. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and looked at my recent calls. The hospital number showed 3:17 p.m. The difference meant nothing and it meant everything. He had signed 8 minutes before they called me. In an emergency that's not strange, I told myself. Paperwork first, then phone calls. But wasn't he supposed to be at work across town? He should have been 20 minutes away at that hour. Maybe he worked from home today. Maybe he forgot to tell us. Maybe. A boy in a yellow hoodie coughed into his sleeve. Somewhere an intercom chirped and a voice said, "Dr. Hannity to imaging." The lemon cleaner smell deepened. I took the top sheet and, as if I were fixing the angle, I straightened it on the counter. My hands were steady now. Calm has a way of arriving when your fear needs room to look around. I leaned in a little closer. The ink line had a faint drag where the pen paused on the T. An old habit of his, he dots his I's late and bars his T's with a second thought. I heard my daughter's laugh in my head, the one she used when she teased him for writing like a 10th grader. Mary had a warm, round laugh, a laugh that made strangers smile. My throat closed. "Do you need a seat?" The clerk asked softly. "I'm fine," I said, and, to my surprise, I was. I slipped my phone out again and took a slow breath. Not to call anyone. Not yet. I opened the camera and snapped a quick photo of the page, the timestamp, the signature. I told myself it was just so I wouldn't forget the insurance policy number on line 3. But what I really wanted was to anchor that minute in something I could hold up to the light later. When my mind stopped trembling, they finally called my name and led me past a curtain to a small room with a vinyl chair and a humming machine. The walls were the color of oatmeal. On the tray beside the chair sat a styrofoam cup with coffee in it, gone cold. I reached for it anyway, for the warmth of the memory if not the cup. I pictured the stairs in my daughter's house, the turn at the landing, the smooth banister, the rug runner Eric installed last spring. He had measured it twice. He had said, "We'll make it safer for you, Mary. Your mom's knees, too." I waited for the doctor. I waited for my breath to even out. I waited for someone to tell me the world hadn't tipped. When the curtain finally rattled, it was not the doctor who stepped in but a different nurse, cheeks pink from hurrying. "They're finishing up her scans," she said. "Do you have any questions?" I looked down at the visitor sticker clinging crookedly to my sweater. My question surprised me when it came out, low and calm. "Yes," I said. "Can I see the intake form again?" She blinked. Then handed it over. That's when I noticed the second box I'd skimmed right past, the one marked "Relationship of Accompanying Adult to Patient." It wasn't the checked "spouse" that made my heart knock. It was the note scrawled beside it in the same careful hand as the signature, found at bottom of stairs at 2:50. 2:50. Not 3 o'clock. Not just now, not a few minutes ago. A time. A certainty, and the certainty, I knew in my bones, would be the first thread I'd have to pull. I sat there, holding the intake form in my lap like it was a lifeline, and for a moment, I wondered if the whole world had suddenly turned upside down. 2:50, my daughter had fallen at 2:50, not 3:00. My fingers trembled as I traced the edge of the paper with my thumb, my mind spinning. Eric had told me, only an hour earlier, that she was upstairs, fine, getting ready for their anniversary dinner. He had called me as I was driving to the market. They were planning a quiet night, a dinner at home, a movie. My daughter had sounded normal, cheerful, her voice warm with the same affection I had grown to expect from her. She had always been good at making everything sound okay, even when it wasn't, but now this. I looked up at the nurse standing in the doorway, still waiting patiently for a response. Her face was a soft mask of concern, but something in her eyes told me she was used to this, a polite curiosity about what might come next. It wasn't her fault. She didn't know I wasn't just waiting for news. I was waiting for answers. "Is this the only intake form?" I asked, my voice steady but a little too controlled. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's the one we have on record." I swallowed, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "I need to speak to the attending physician. I'll wait here." The nurse blinked, then nodded. "Of course. I'll let him know." As she left the room, I felt a coldness spreading through me. A coldness that came from the space between what I knew and what I suspected. If there was one thing I understood well, it was that no one was going to give me the truth unless I demanded it. And at this moment, it felt like I had to demand it from everyone, even from my daughter's husband. I sat back in the chair, trying to breathe steadily. But every time I took a deep breath, I could taste the bitterness of suspicion curling up in my throat. Eric had never been good at hiding things, though everyone around him seemed to think he was. He was the perfect picture of an attentive husband, thoughtful, polite, and forever playing the role of the ideal son-in-law. But I'd seen glimpses of something different in the years since he and Mary had gotten together. Little things, the way he'd get defensive over trivial matters, how he spoke to her sometimes, as though he resented the woman he had promised to love. But Mary? She never saw it. Maybe she didn't want to. Maybe she couldn't, but that signature, that timestamp. It was like a slap to the face. The door creaked open, and in stepped Dr. Hall, a middle-aged man with round glasses that perched precariously on the edge of his nose. He looked hurried, but not unkind. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your daughter's stable for now. We're waiting for the results of the CT scan to rule out any serious internal damage. But there are no signs of immediate trauma." I nodded, but I couldn't quite focus on what he was saying. His words felt distant, like they were coming from a great length. I was thinking about the form. About the discrepancy in the time. About the questions that kept hammering in my head. "Doctor," I interrupted, my voice thin but steady. "Can I ask about the intake form again?" Dr. Hall gave me a puzzled look but didn't protest. "Sure. What about it?" I passed him the form, watching as his brow furrowed at the timestamp. He glanced at me, then back at the paper. "This was filled out by your son-in-law?" he asked, his tone still neutral. "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "But the time on it doesn't match when I got the call. My daughter's accident was at 2:50, not 3 o'clock. It seems small, but something doesn't sit right." Dr. Hall stared at the form for a moment longer, then sighed and rubbed his eyes. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Whitaker. I'll look into it, but for now, I need to ask you to let us finish examining your daughter. We'll give you an update shortly." I nodded. He started to leave, but then paused. "You'll be okay?" I almost laughed at the question. Would I be okay? After all these years of raising a daughter who was now lying unconscious in a hospital bed, after dealing with a man I thought I knew, would I be okay? But instead of answering, I simply smiled a tight smile and said, "Yes, I'll be fine." The door clicked shut behind him, and I sank back into the chair. My hands, which had been steady before, started trembling again. This time, though, it wasn't from fear. It was from something much deeper, something I couldn't yet name. But that was steadily growing stronger. I glanced at the clock on the wall, 4:04 p.m. The minutes felt longer now, dragging between the hospital's sterile walls. A nurse passed by, but she didn't stop to speak. I watched her, then looked back at the intake form, which still sat on my lap, heavy with the truth I wasn't yet ready to face. I snapped a photo of the form, just as I had before, and slipped my phone into my pocket. If this was going to get messy, and I felt in my gut that it would need proof. And if I was going to get any answers, I would have to keep my eyes wide open. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't just a fall down some stairs, and I wasn't going to let it go until I knew the whole truth. It's funny how quickly the truth can hide behind a polished smile. Eric had always been charming, the sort of man who could win over any room with just a few words and his careful, practiced politeness. He had the kind of handsomeness that wasn't bold but steady, a square jaw, neatly parted hair, always dressed as if he'd just walked out of a magazine ad. The perfect son-in-law, my friends used to say. Well-mannered, well-spoken, and good to my daughter, at least, that's what I let myself believe. I never wanted to see beyond the surface. A mother's love can do that. It can blind you to the things you'd rather not notice. I had known him for years. Long before he married Mary. He had come over for dinner, helped set the table, stayed late to talk about old movies and his childhood. But then there were moments, small moments, that didn't quite fit. I remember the first time he called me by my first name, Margaret, instead of Mrs. Whitaker. He'd been so casual about it. Like it was nothing. Just a little slip, I told myself. He's young, eager to fit in. But there was something in his eyes that lingered too long, a kind of defiance behind his smile. I brushed it off, of course. He's young, he's polite, he means well, but now, sitting in that sterile hospital room, it felt as though my daughter's life had been slipping through my fingers without me noticing. Every smile Eric had given me, every polite word, each one now felt like a layer of dust. Something I should have wiped away long ago. I replayed everything in my mind, the times he'd been a little too quick to agree with everything I said. The way he'd always been a little too perfect. The times Mary would mention a small disagreement, but always cover it with a laugh. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom, we're fine," she'd say. But I wasn't sure I believed it. Still, I tried to ignore my misgivings. After all, who was I to question a man who had married my daughter, who stood by her through thick and thin? But when I stood outside that hospital room, staring at the intake form in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The form had been signed by him at exactly 3:09 p.m. The same time he had been at his office, supposedly, when Mary fell. I couldn't fathom it. Was I the only one who was seeing this? Or had I simply ignored it all these years, buried my instinct in favor of the charming, perfect facade? I shook my head, trying to clear it. I couldn't afford to doubt myself now. I had to stay calm. I had to keep my focus. But how could I? Just as I began to think of calling Mark, the investigator I'd known for years, the door creaked open. It was the same nurse who had handed me the intake form earlier. She gave me a soft smile, but I could tell she was holding something back. "Mrs. Whitaker?" she asked, stepping into the room. "The doctor would like to see you." My heart skipped a beat. I stood up too quickly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. I followed the nurse down the narrow hallway, past a couple of curtained rooms where the sounds of low conversations filled the air. I could feel my pulse quicken as we approached the doctor's office. Every step felt heavier than the last. My legs were shaking, and I tried to steady myself. But when I walked in, my gaze immediately landed on the man who had been married to my daughter for over a decade. Eric. He stood there, eyes darting nervously toward me, his posture rigid as he shifted from foot to foot. But when he saw me, he froze. He didn't say anything, didn't even move. He just looked. "Guilty, Eric, what are you doing here?" I asked, my voice strained but calmed. He cleared his throat and gave me that smile, the one he always gave when he wanted to appear in control. But something in his eyes, something too familiar, told me he was anything but. He wasn't in control. "Not now, not here. I wanted to check on Mary," he said, his voice smooth but tense. "I thought she'd want to see me." Something about his words didn't sit right with me. He had told me he was at the office. He had told me he had been too busy to talk. Why was he here? Why was he so desperate to look like the dutiful husband? The doctor glanced between us, clearing his throat. "I thought it might be good if we all spoke for a moment," he said, looking at Eric first, then me. "We have some concerns, Mrs. Whitaker. And we'd like to get your insight on what happened." "What kind of concerns?" I asked, my voice steady, but my insides were already twisting into a knot. Eric's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Doctor Hall turned to me and handed over a piece of paper. It was a printout of Mary's vital signs, but there was more, something else buried underneath the medical details. A discrepancy. A possible clue. A faint shadow under the skin. The X-ray revealed something unusual, Dr. Hall continued, choosing his words carefully. It seems your daughter may have sustained injuries before the fall, injuries that are consistent with trauma that doesn't quite match a simple slip or fall. I froze. The air in the room seemed to shift. I could feel the tension between Eric and me, thickening with every word the doctor said. Eric's face had gone pale, and I watched as his hands clenched into fists at his sides. What kind of trauma? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hall hesitated. It's hard to say without more testing, but it appears that some of the injuries may be from an earlier incident, possibly even before the fall. I didn't need to hear more. My mind was already piecing together the puzzle, and the pieces were starting to fit in ways I wasn't prepared to see. Eric's face had gone even paler. He swallowed hard. That's all I know for now, Dr. Hall said, nodding toward the door. We'll update you as soon as we can. I didn't move. I couldn't. My gaze stayed locked on Eric as he slowly backed away, his gaze avoiding mine. The perfect husband. But now, I saw him for what he really was. I stood in the hallway long after the doctor had left, feeling like I was floating in some strange fog. My eyes were fixed on the door behind which Mary lay, unconscious. I wanted to walk in, sit by her side, take her hand and tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not when I wasn't even sure what was going on. I hadn't expected to find what I was looking for, but there I was, staring at the envelope. It had been sitting on the kitchen counter at Mary and Eric's house the last time I visited. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, just a standard mailing envelope with the name of an insurance company printed in bold letters. But now, it seemed like the final piece to a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The envelope was addressed to Eric Whitaker, but the return address was a company I didn't recognize. The strange thing was that it was sealed with the kind of wax I hadn't seen since my grandmother's time, thick, deep red, and slightly worn, as if it had been carefully pressed into place. I felt a chill creep down my spine as I held it in my hands. It was too quiet in the room. Everything was too still. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. I reached for the letter opener in the drawer, its polished silver gleaming under the kitchen light. The sound of it cutting through the wax was sharp, too sharp. The feeling of dread it brought was unbearable. When the envelope was finally open, I pulled out the contents, and there it was, an insurance policy. A policy in Mary's name. The policy's value wasn't listed directly, but the number of pages, the signatures, and the dates, all of them told me one thing: this wasn't some accidental insurance plan. It was intentional. It was new. And it was a policy Eric had taken out for his own benefit. He was the sole beneficiary. I could feel my stomach twist as the implications sank in. Had he been planning something? Had he already thought about the worst-case scenario? My hands shook as I held the document up, examining it under the soft glow of the kitchen light. It was dated 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. I could barely breathe. How could I have missed this? How could Mary have missed it? Eric had always been careful with money, too careful, I now realized. But this? This wasn't careful. This was cold calculation. I could barely hold the paper steady enough to read through the fine print, my mind racing with questions. Why hadn't Mary told me? Was this the first time she'd seen it too? My heart broke for my daughter. She trusted him. She loved him. She had built a life with him. And here he was, secretly preparing for the worst possible thing. Preparing, perhaps, for her death. The envelope felt like lead in my hands. I set it down slowly on the counter and wiped my forehead. I had to do something. I had to confront him. But first, I had to understand everything, to make sure I wasn't jumping to conclusions. I wasn't the type to make rash decisions, not when it came to my family. But this? This felt wrong. It felt like the betrayal was already carved in stone. I reached for the phone, and for a moment, I simply stared at it. I knew who I needed to call. Mark, the private investigator. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to dive into the truth, even when it was murky and dangerous. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was already out of my control. This wasn't just a matter of questioning Eric anymore. It was about whether my daughter had unknowingly been living in the middle of a lie. I dialed Mark's number and pressed the phone to my ear, listening to the ringing as the seconds seemed to stretch out longer than I'd ever felt them before. The way he answered was clipped, businesslike. Mark. It's Margaret Whitaker. Margaret? His voice softened a bit. What's going on? You okay? I'm not sure. I think I found something. Something that doesn't make sense. Mark stayed silent for a beat, waiting for me to go on. I told him everything, the envelope, the policy, the date, the beneficiary. I laid it all out, piece by piece, without pausing. By the time I finished, I could hear him sighing heavily on the other end of the line. "You need to be careful, Margaret," he said. "You don't want to get yourself mixed up in something that's bigger than you think. I'll look into it, but you need to stay alert." "I will," I said, my voice thin. I need answers. I need to know what's really going on here." "I'll get back to you," he said. Before hanging up, I stared at the phone, unsure of what I was supposed to do next. Should I tell Mary? Should I confront Eric? But I knew deep down that I had to be careful. I couldn't act impulsively, not when it could hurt my daughter more than I already had. But the more I thought about the envelope, the more I knew I was facing a truth I didn't want to see. And yet, it was staring me in the face. I stood up slowly, leaving the kitchen behind me. The house was too quiet, too empty. Mary and Eric's home, once full of laughter and warmth, now felt like a house of secrets. The ticking clock on the wall, the soft hum of the refrigerator, all of it seemed to echo in the stillness, reminding me of how little I knew, but I would find out. I would find out what he had done. The house smelled like cinnamon and dust, the scent of someone trying to keep things warm even as they start to fade. It was quiet, too quiet, like the kind of silence you feel when something important has been lost but no one knows how to say it yet. I stood at the foot of the stairs, my eyes tracing the curve of the old banister. Mary had always said it was a little too polished for her taste, the wood too shiny, but Eric had insisted. It had been his idea to make things look newer around the house. A fresh coat of paint, new light fixtures, the rug runner on the stairs. That runner was still there, untouched, its ends folded neatly in place. I had seen it just days before the accident, when Mary and I had gone shopping for plants for the porch. But now, as I stood there alone in the dim hallway, it looked like a reminder of everything I had missed. I reached out to touch the banister, its smoothness under my hand feeling wrong. It was too clean, too polished. The edges were pristine. There was no wear, no signs of daily use. Just like everything else in this house, there was nothing that told me it was real anymore. I stepped forward and leaned in closer, narrowing my eyes at the area where the rug met the baseboard. It looked slightly different. There was a slight ridge where the rug had been pulled back, something small, but noticeable. I crouched down, running my fingers along the edge, feeling a cold, sticky residue. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe dust. Maybe nothing at all. But the feeling in my stomach twisted tighter when I realized what it was: wax. Thick, clear wax, the kind you use for candle making, but it was different from the wax on the envelope. This had been applied deliberately, not as a mistake or spill. It had been placed there. My mind immediately went back to the insurance policy, back to the picture I had seen earlier, back to the quiet little inconsistencies. And now this? A fresh coat of wax on the banister, as though someone had tried to smooth over the imperfections, just like the lies that had been smoothing over Mary's life for years. I stood up slowly, my head spinning. Why was it here? Why hadn't I noticed it before? And more importantly, why was it still here after the paramedics had come, after everything had happened? Someone had cleaned up this house after the accident, but it wasn't the usual sort of cleaning. It was almost as though someone had tried to erase the evidence of what had really happened here. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't an accident. I could feel it in my bones, and I knew that this house, the one that had once felt like a safe place, was hiding more than I had ever imagined. I pulled my phone from my pocket and took a photo of the wax. The flash snapped loudly in the stillness of the hallway, but I barely heard it. My mind was too busy processing the next steps, the inevitable conclusion. I needed more. I needed proof, and I needed it now. I pushed the thought of Mary out of my mind for a moment. I had to focus. Eric was always too careful, he always thought ahead. This wasn't just a fall. It was staged, a carefully orchestrated accident that had been meant to look like a simple slip. The wax was proof of that. Someone had prepared the stairs, had made sure the accident was set up just right. It wasn't some random thing that happened while Mary was getting her coat. I could feel the tears welling in my eyes, but I held them back. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. Not when I had to act. I had to be smart, clear-headed. This wasn't the time for tears. It was the time for action. I turned and walked back to the hallway, my shoes clicking softly against the wood. As I passed the living room, I noticed something else out of place, a framed photo of Mary and Eric, smiling at a wedding reception. It was a picture-perfect moment, one of those moments you take because everything looks good on the outside. But behind that smile, I knew there was something else. Something I'd never seen before. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a small plastic bag from the drawer. I carefully placed the wax sample inside and sealed it. I knew I had to get it tested, but first, I needed to get back to the hospital. The doctors would be able to run the tests I couldn't do. And they would be able to confirm what I already suspected. But before I left, I stared at the picture again. And for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt pity. I had spent so many years convinced that Eric was the perfect man for Mary. I had convinced myself that he would always be there for her. But now, standing in her home, with all the evidence piling up before me, I realized the truth: he had been playing a game. And he had been playing it for a long time. I couldn't protect Mary from everything, but I could protect her now. I could make sure that justice was served. I walked to the door, the bag of evidence in my hand, and stepped out into the chilly afternoon. The world seemed colder somehow, as though it had shifted beneath my feet. And for the first time in a long while, I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I knew I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going. For her. For all of us. I had never fully appreciated how much weight the truth could carry until that afternoon. How it could make your bones ache and your mind race, like you were running a race you didn't know you'd signed up for. But there I was, sitting in my old car outside Mark's office, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the unassuming brick building in front of me. I had called him earlier, the second I got to the car. His voice had been calm, reassuring, but I could tell there was a crackle of urgency beneath it. He had promised to meet me in an hour. I hadn't hesitated. I needed someone who could cut through the lies faster than I could. The phone call had been the final push. Mark was an investigator, sure, but he wasn't the kind who just looked at documents. He looked for the stories buried in between, the signs that no one else saw. I trusted him. But even as I parked and took in the familiar sight of his office, old books stacked along the window ledge, a faint smell of coffee in the air, I could feel the weight of everything pressing in on me. Eric had done this. Eric had orchestrated all of it. I walked through the door and immediately felt the warmth of Mark's presence. His office was cluttered, with files strewn across the desk and books on shelves that looked as though they had been read over and over again. But his eyes always had a way of locking onto yours, cutting right through the surface, like he could see straight to the heart of things. And today, I needed him to do just that. He stood when he saw me, his expression softening with recognition. "Margaret, good to see you. Have a seat." I sat across from him, my fingers brushing over the bag of wax in my lap, still wrapped in plastic. He had told me to bring anything I thought could be important, and it felt like the only tangible thing I had left to hold on to. My mind kept racing through the events: Mary's fall, the insurance policy, Eric's signature, the wax, everything. It felt like I was piecing together a jigsaw puzzle. But the pieces kept slipping through my fingers. "Tell me everything," Mark said. His voice low but direct, like a trusted confidant. I took a deep breath and started. I told him about the intake form at the hospital, about the timestamp, and how Eric's signature had stood out. I explained how the wax had been on the banister, how it felt wrong, like someone had tried to cover something up. I told him about the insurance policy, about the fact that Eric was the sole beneficiary, about how it had been taken out so recently. Mark listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as I spoke, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. When I was done, I felt drained, like I had emptied out everything I had kept inside for the past few hours. I needed him to tell me what to do next. I needed him to tell me this wasn't a mistake, that everything I suspected was true. "This doesn't look good, Margaret," Mark said quietly after a long pause. "But it's a good thing you brought me in. There's a lot here that's going to need some digging." "Wax on the banister? That's a setup." He tried to make it look like a simple fall, but that's not what happened here. He leaned forward, his fingers tapping on the edge of the desk. "You're right to be concerned. This wasn't just a random accident. Someone planned it, carefully, and with purpose." I felt a chill in my spine. He was confirming everything I feared, and yet, a part of me was relieved. I wasn't imagining things. Eric had done this. But why? Why would he go to such lengths? Mark continued, his tone steady. "I'll run a background check on Eric, see if there's anything else in his history that matches this behavior. I'll also contact some of my colleagues who can look into the insurance policy. The timing of it is too perfect to be a coincidence." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My mind was spinning with questions. "What about the wax?" I asked finally. "I need to know what that means. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip. It was intentional." "I'll get it tested," he said. "But here's what you need to know. Wax like that is used for making something slick, easy to slip on. Someone knew exactly how to make that fall look convincing. That's not something you do unless you've thought about it." I felt the weight of his words sink in. Eric had thought this through, planned it out. He had known how to make it all look like an accident, and for a moment, I wondered if he had even fooled himself. Could he have been so sure of his plan that he didn't even question the consequences? "I'll keep you updated," Mark said, standing up and walking over to the small filing cabinet. "For now, stay close to the hospital, keep your guard up. Don't let Eric know you're suspicious. It's important that he doesn't see you coming." I stood up, suddenly feeling like my legs had turned to stone. But I wasn't about to back down now. I wasn't about to let this man, this perfect husband, get away with it. Not when it came to my daughter. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice firm. "I don't know what's coming next, but I'm ready." I'm not backing off. Not this time. He gave me a small, understanding smile. Good. You shouldn't. I left his office feeling a little lighter, as though the truth was a weight I could carry, but only if I kept moving forward. The wax, the signature, the insurance policy, they were just pieces of the puzzle. But there was more to this story. And I was going to find out what it was. The next few days passed in a blur, each moment stretching out longer than the last. I was living in two worlds, one where my daughter was lying in a hospital bed, and another where the truth about her life, her marriage, was unfolding in ways I could hardly bear. I felt like I was wading through a thick fog, unable to see ahead, but knowing that I couldn't stop moving forward. Mark had kept his promise. By the time I called him again, he had made progress. I've got something, he said on the phone. His voice was calm, but I could hear the weight behind it. It's a receipt. For a delivery that was made on the same day your daughter fell. I felt my heart drop. What kind of delivery? An invoice, Mark replied. It was signed by Eric, around the time your daughter was supposed to have been upstairs, before the fall. I closed my eyes, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a cold, sharp finality. A delivery? What had Eric been ordering? What had he needed delivered, and why hadn't he told me about it? Can you meet me? Mark asked. I didn't hesitate. I told him I'd be there in 20 minutes. The anticipation of what I might learn was enough to drive me forward, but the questions it raised only made the pit in my stomach deepen. Why hadn't I noticed the signs earlier? Why hadn't I questioned Eric more, pushed harder to see who he really was? When I arrived at Mark's office, the receipt was already sitting on the desk in front of me. It was printed out from an online vendor, the kind of place where people buy in bulk, industrial supplies, things that shouldn't have anything to do with a family like mine. But there it was, a purchase of slip-resistant matting, signed by Eric Whitaker. And most importantly, time-stamped at exactly 2:47 p.m., the same time he had been at his office. Supposedly. Mark's fingers tapped the paper as he looked at me. What's striking here, he said, is that the matting was ordered for stairway safety. He paused, his gaze unwavering. But you said your daughter was never concerned about the stairs. You said the house was already safe, right? I nodded. Mary never complained. She always loved the way they looked. Eric insisted they were just fine. Exactly, Mark said, folding the receipt carefully. This purchase doesn't make sense. Not for someone who already had safety measures in place. And it was ordered just hours before the fall, with express delivery. It looks like someone was preparing for something to happen, not just fixing a problem. I sat there for a moment, my mind racing. What was Eric thinking? Had he been setting everything up for days, or had it been a spur-of-the-moment decision? The matting, the wax on the banister, it was all too coordinated to be a coincidence. This wasn't an accident. It had been planned, and now I was seeing the full extent of it. Mark leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. We're getting closer, Margaret. I'll pull up the delivery records to track the exact timing and route, but this is significant. Eric's been trying to make this look like an accident for a while. And now, we have a trail. I felt a chill run through me. It was one thing to suspect someone, to feel the gut-wrenching disbelief that a person you trusted could betray you. But it was another thing entirely to see the evidence laid out in front of you, proof that the man who had once been my daughter's protector was now her orchestrator. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't sure how I was supposed to feel, angry, sad, terrified, or all of the above. But the truth was finally coming into focus, and I couldn't back down now. Thank you, Mark, I said, my voice quiet but determined. What's next? Mark smiled, a small, grim expression that told me he understood the weight of what I was carrying. Next, we dig deeper. I'll reach out to the delivery service, confirm the route, and see if we can get anything else from the records. We're not done yet, Margaret. But we're getting there. I nodded, my heart heavy but resolute. I wasn't going to let Eric slip away with this. I wasn't going to let him hurt my daughter any more than he already had. I had to be strong for her, for both of us. I stood up, feeling a little lighter now that the pieces were starting to come together, even though the weight of the truth still lingered in my chest. I'll wait for your call. Mark walked me to the door, his expression softening. Take care of yourself, Margaret. I know it's tough, but you're doing the right thing. As I walked out of his office, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The fog wasn't gone, but at least I could see the path in front of me now. And no matter where it led, I wasn't going to stop until I had the answers, and until Eric had to face the consequences of what he'd done. The days blurred together as I waited for Mark to come back with more information. The receipt, the wax, the matting, each clue felt like a weight added to my chest, pressing down harder and harder with every passing moment. The truth was coming, but it was slow. Too slow. And the closer I got, the harder it became to breathe. I sat in my living room one evening, staring at the phone in my hand. It was so simple. Just a phone call, a question. But I hadn't called Mary yet. I couldn't. Not when I didn't know what to say, not when I wasn't sure what the truth would do to her. She trusted Eric. She believed in him. And if I told her now, would she believe me? Or would she be caught between us, torn between a mother's love and a husband's lies? The thought of her face, the one she'd wear when the truth finally hit her, stopped me cold. I couldn't do that to her, not until I had everything. Not until I could protect her, even if she couldn't see it yet. But then, in the quiet of my house, as I sat there waiting, something else came to mind, a conversation I'd had with Mary months ago. She had mentioned a file, a folder on her laptop, a place where she kept things that were just hers. She'd never said much more about it. Only that it was private. But now, thinking about it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it might hold the key to everything. I grabbed my bag and left the house, locking the door behind me. I knew where Mary kept the laptop, on the desk by the window in the small study upstairs. The soft light of the late afternoon filtered in through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. As I sat down in the chair, the laptop sat there, open to a blank screen, waiting for me to make the first move. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, uncertainty creeping in. I had never done this before, never snooped around like this. But it was too late for hesitation. I opened the laptop, and just as I was about to type in the password, I remembered the folder she had told me about. Private, she had said, with a little laugh. I could almost hear her voice now, echoing in my mind, but this wasn't the time for memories. This was the time for answers. I navigated to the folder, my heart beating faster with each click. I couldn't help but feel like an intruder, like I was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But there was no going back now. The folder was password protected, just like I'd expected. I took a deep breath and typed the first combination that came to my mind, her maiden name, a detail she had always said was too old-fashioned for anyone to guess. The screen flickered for a moment, and then the folder opened. Inside were several documents, photos, and notes. But one file stood out, a draft of an email, dated just a few days ago. I clicked on it, and as it opened, I felt a lump form in my throat. The words on the screen were barely more than a rough draft, but they were clear enough to tell me everything I needed to know. The subject line read, "A note before everything changes." The text inside was even more chilling. I don't know how to say this, but I need to be honest with you. I think I've been wrong about a lot of things. About my marriage, about Eric. He's been hiding things from me, things I'm not sure I can ever forgive him for. I don't know if I can trust him anymore, but I don't want to lose him. I don't want to lose the life we've built. The message trailed off there, as though Mary had started to write more but never finished. It was clear she had started questioning Eric, started seeing the cracks, but she hadn't been able to face them yet. She had felt the tension building, but she hadn't known how to escape it. And now, reading this, I realized how much she had been carrying on her own. She had been fighting her own quiet battle, just as I had been. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of what I was holding in my hands. I didn't want to read more. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but I couldn't help myself. I scrolled down, and that's when I saw it, the final piece I had been searching for. A single line stood out at the bottom of the email. Written in a different tone, more deliberate. "I know what he's been doing. I've seen the papers. I've seen the receipts. He's been planning this for months. And I think he's going to try to hurt me. I'm scared." I felt my chest tighten. The words echoed in my mind as the room seemed to spin around me. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It wasn't just my suspicions. Mary had known, at least on some level. She had seen the signs. She had been afraid, and I hadn't even known. I sat back in the chair, my heart racing. What had Eric done to her? What had he planned? And how much longer could she live in the dark, trusting him, loving him, while he was plotting her downfall? The only thing I knew for sure now was that I couldn't stay in the dark any longer. Either. I closed the laptop, my fingers trembling as I set it back on the desk. I had the proof. I had the words, the clues, the receipts, and now, Mary's fear. I wasn't going to let it end this way. Not for her. As I left the room, I felt a new determination fill me. The truth was no longer hidden. And I was going to make sure it came to light. The morning after I discovered the email, I couldn't sit still. The air felt thicker somehow, as if everything around me was moving at half speed and I was stuck, unable to catch up. I had spent hours in the night, alone in my thoughts, piecing together the truth, trying to figure out what to do next. And yet, despite all the evidence, despite the wax, the insurance policy, the receipt for the matting, and now this, Mary's handwritten confession, I felt no closer to knowing how to protect her. The police had to be involved. There was no other way. This wasn't just about saving her from a terrible situation. It was about making sure Eric couldn't hurt her again. I stood at the counter, staring at the police report in my hands, the one I'd picked up earlier that day. It felt strange, holding it there in the kitchen, the smell of coffee brewing in the background, the same old sounds of the house. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Not in my family. Not to Mary, but the report confirmed it all. The injuries she had sustained from the fall, internal bruising, a mild concussion, those were signs of a fall that hadn't happened as it should have. It didn't add up. She had fallen, yes, but something was off about the way she had landed, the way her body had reacted. This wasn't just an accident. The doctors had flagged the signs, too. They'd said it didn't match a simple slip. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called Detective Reeves, the one Mark had recommended. He was the kind of cop who didn't sugarcoat things, who didn't deal with half-truths. He was efficient, direct. He answered quickly, his voice cool but professional. "Detective Reeves," he said, his voice steady. "Detective," I replied, my voice tight, almost breaking. "This is Margaret Whitaker. I need to report something about my daughter's accident." There was a pause on the other end of the line, just long enough for me to feel the weight of what I was about to say. "What's going on, Mrs. Whitaker?" I gave him everything. I told him about the insurance policy, about the matting delivery, about the wax on the banister. I told him about the time-stamped receipt and Mary's handwritten note on the laptop. The one that confirmed everything I had been afraid to admit to myself. "We think Eric planned this," I said. My voice shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. "I don't know what he's planning, but I need your help. I don't want him to hurt her anymore." I didn't expect much. In fact, I half expected him to dismiss me, to say it was too early, that I had no hard evidence. "But I was wrong, Mrs. Whitaker," he said after a long pause. "I believe you. We'll take it from here. I'll send someone over to your house to collect everything you've gathered. You did the right thing." My heart stuttered in my chest. For the first time in days, I felt a faint flicker of hope. "Thank you," I said, and hung up the phone. It wasn't much. But it was a start. And that was all I needed right now, anything to make sure that Eric didn't get away with it. I hung the phone up, my hands shaking as I set it down on the counter. I looked out the window, watching the early morning light filter through the trees. It was quiet again, too quiet. But it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the calm before a storm. I paced the house for a while, unsure of what to do next, until I heard a knock at the door. It was Mark, and with him, 2 officers from the local precinct. They came in quietly, nodding at me, their faces impassive but professional. I motioned toward the kitchen table, where I had laid out all the evidence, the wax, the receipt, the email. "Everything. I'll let you talk to them, Margaret," Mark said, his voice low. "I'll be outside, if you need anything." I nodded, my throat tight. I couldn't speak. I could only watch as the officers sat down and started taking notes. One of them pulled out a recorder, and the other began sifting through the papers I had prepared. It felt surreal, watching them methodically go through the pile of evidence I had gathered. I had known I was right to bring them in, but there was a part of me that wanted to believe that it was all a misunderstanding, that I had somehow misread everything. But I couldn't do that anymore. Not when I saw the way they looked at the wax, the receipt, the policy. They were professionals. They knew what they were looking at. After what felt like hours, the officers stood and collected their things. "We'll be in touch, Mrs. Whitaker," one of them said, his voice firm but kind. "This is more than enough to get us started." They left, and I was left alone again, standing in the silence of the house that had once been full of laughter and warmth. But that warmth was gone now, replaced by the cold certainty that Eric had been playing a dangerous game. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't going to rest until he was held accountable for what he'd done. I sat back down at the table, my hands flat against the cool surface. I had done everything I could. I had handed them the evidence. Now it was out of my hands. But I couldn't stop thinking about Mary, about how much she had suffered. And how much longer she would have to endure this before it was all over. I just hoped it wouldn't be too late. Days passed. Each one seeming to stretch longer than the last. The silence of the house was starting to feel like a constant weight on my shoulders, the stillness a reminder that things had changed, that nothing would ever be the same again. The police were working behind the scenes, piecing together everything I had given them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that every moment Mary spent in that hospital bed was another moment she was vulnerable. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Then, one morning, the phone rang. "Mrs. Whitaker?" It was Detective Reeves. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something that made my heart skip. "Detective, is everything all right?" I asked, my throat tight. "We've received the final autopsy addendum," he said. "I think you need to see this." I stood up, feeling my pulse quicken. "What does it say?" "There's more to your daughter's injuries than we initially thought," he replied, his tone serious. "I need you to come down to the precinct. It's important." I felt a cold shiver run through me. This wasn't just about the fall anymore. This was bigger. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel of the car. The drive to the precinct felt endless. Every red light, every turn, seemed to drag me deeper into the truth I hadn't been ready to face. When I arrived, Detective Reeves was waiting for me outside. His face was unreadable, and for the first time, I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. I followed him inside, my mind racing, trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming next. He led me to a small, quiet room, where he handed me a thick file. "This is the addendum to the autopsy report," he said, his voice low. "There's something you need to see." I opened the file, my eyes scanning the pages. I couldn't focus at first, my heart pounding in my chest as the words blurred before me. But then, I saw it. The entry that made everything else stop. The medical examiner's note read, "In addition to the concussions and bruising consistent with a fall, the patient also showed signs of previous injuries, including a fractured wrist and internal bruising consistent with defensive wounds. The evidence suggests that the patient had been subjected to physical force prior to the incident." I felt my breath catch in my throat. The words jumped out at me like a punch in the stomach. Defensive wounds. Physical force. It was clear now. Eric hadn't just let Mary fall. He had hurt her before, he had been hurting her all along. I read it again, my hands shaking. Defensive wounds, the term kept echoing in my mind. My daughter had fought back. She had tried to protect herself. "Detective," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What does this mean?" Reeves sat across from me, his face softening with empathy. "It means that what you've suspected all along is true, Mrs. Whitaker. Your daughter wasn't just the victim of an accident. She was a victim of something much worse." I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. How could this be happening? How had Eric, my daughter's husband, been capable of this? How had I not seen the signs? The detective continued, his voice steady. "The bruising isn't just from a fall. Your daughter tried to fight back. We're still piecing things together, but this report confirms that Eric's actions weren't an accident. He planned this." I could feel the room spinning. I gripped the file tighter, desperate for something solid to hold on to. But nothing was making sense anymore. "I don't understand," I whispered. "How could he do this to her?" Detective Reeves leaned forward, his gaze steady. "The evidence suggests that Eric has been systematically abusing your daughter for some time. It's likely that this wasn't the first time he hurt her, but rather the culmination of years of control and manipulation. The fall was just the final act, the one that would make it all look like an accident." I closed my eyes, trying to process what he was saying. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the file across the room and pretend I had never seen it. But I couldn't. The truth was in front of me. And it was uglier than I could ever have imagined. "Detective," I said, my voice trembling with a new determination, "what happens now? What can we do to stop him?" Reeves looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet respect. "We're going to build a case against him. We'll use the evidence you've gathered, and now with this autopsy report, we've got the final confirmation we need. Eric won't get away with this. We'll make sure of it." For the first time since all of this had begun, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. I stood up, the file heavy in my hands. "I need to be there for her," I said, my voice steady now, though my heart was breaking. "She needs me now more than ever." Reeves nodded. "Go. We'll handle the rest. But don't worry, he won't get away with this." I left the precinct with a new sense of purpose. It wasn't over yet. It wouldn't be over until Eric had been held accountable for everything he had done. But now, at least, I had the truth on my side, and that truth was all I needed to fight. The weeks after the autopsy report felt like a whirlwind. Everything was happening so fast, yet it felt like I was moving through thick fog, unable to catch up with the enormity of it all. The police were closing in on Eric, gathering all the evidence, building the case piece by piece. But even as they worked, the fear, the anger, and the overwhelming grief still clung to me like a second skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mary's face, her trusting eyes, the way she looked at Eric, the way she had believed in him. But that was over now. The truth was out, and there was no going back. It was a crisp morning when I received the call. It was Detective Reeves again, his voice steady, but there was something in it now, something final. "Mrs. Whitaker," he began, "we've spoken with Eric. He's been charged with assault and attempted murder. He's agreed to cooperate." The words hung in the air, their weight heavy on my chest. "Cooperate?" I repeated, my voice hoarse. "Yes," he confirmed. "We've made an arrangement. He'll give us a statement." I didn't know what to feel. Part of me was relieved, knowing that Eric would finally have to face what he had done. But another part of me, the part that still couldn't quite believe this was real, wanted to scream. How could this be happening? How could this man, the one who had promised to love and protect my daughter, be capable of such cruelty? "What did he say?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He admitted to everything," Reeves replied. "The abuse, the manipulation, the planning. He told us how he's been trying to get her to trust him again, how he thought he could get away with it all. He even said it was all her fault." Her fault. The words twisted my insides into knots. It was always like this, wasn't it? The abuser never takes responsibility. They always find a way to turn it back on the victim, but I wouldn't let him get away with it. Not this time, I'll be there, I said, my voice firm despite the tears that threatened to spill over. I wasn't sure what I would hear when I saw Eric face to face, but I knew one thing for sure, he had to answer for what he had done. He had to hear from me, from the woman who had raised Mary, who had watched her grow into the strong, beautiful woman she was. I arrived at the precinct a few hours later, the weight of the file in my hands. This was it. The final step. The moment where everything would be laid bare, where Eric would have to face the consequences of his actions. Detective Reeves led me into the interrogation room. Eric was sitting at the table, his hands folded in front of him. He looked different, smaller, somehow, as if the mask he had worn for so long had finally slipped away, leaving only a frightened, remorseful man in its place. He didn't look at me when I entered. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the table, his lips pressed tight together as if he was waiting for the storm to hit. Mrs. Whitaker, Reeves said softly. He's ready to speak with you. I nodded, my hands trembling as I took a seat across from Eric. The room felt too small now. The air too thick with the weight of what had transpired. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, Eric lifted his eyes to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected. Shame, I never meant for this to happen, he said, his voice low, barely a whisper. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I could control it, control her. But it all got out of hand. The words felt like a slap in the face. I had heard them before, from other abusers, from other men who had justified their actions, who had convinced themselves they were in the right. But there was no justifying this. There was no excuse for the pain he had caused, for the manipulation, the lies, the cruelty. I don't want to hear your excuses, I said, my voice steady despite the anger that was rising inside me. You've hurt my daughter. You've destroyed her trust. And you've tried to take everything from her. This isn't about control. This is about you being a coward. Eric flinched at my words, but he didn't say anything. His silence told me everything I needed to know. He had no defense, no argument. He was guilty. And now, he would pay for it. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt her. But I wasn't listening anymore. The apology felt hollow, meaningless. It didn't matter. Not after everything he had done. You don't get to apologize to me, I said, my voice cold. You don't get to apologize to her. You've taken too much. You've broken something that can never be fixed. I stood up, the file still clutched in my hands. I didn't need to hear anymore. The truth was out. Eric had confessed, and now the world would know who he truly was. He wasn't the perfect son-in-law. He was a liar, a manipulator, and a coward. As I walked out of the room, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The damage was done, and it was time for him to face the consequences. It had been a few weeks since Eric's confession, since everything had come to light. The trial was underway, the evidence piled high, and I had learned to live with the steady ache that came with knowing my daughter's life would never be the same. The scars, both visible and invisible, were too deep, too permanent. But there was one thing I knew for sure, justice was being served. Eric would face the consequences of his actions, and for the first time in years, my daughter and I could breathe freely again. But it wasn't just the weight of the past that I had to contend with now. It was the future. Mary was healing, slowly but surely, but there were days when she would look at me with those tired eyes, her silent pain still fresh. I tried to comfort her, to hold her when the memories crept up, but I knew the truth, I couldn't heal her. Only time could do that. This morning, as I stood in the kitchen making coffee, I could hear the sound of birds outside, the same birds that had sung every morning for years. Their songs a constant presence in our lives. It was quiet, too quiet, almost. The house felt different now, emptier in a way, as if we were living in the aftermath of a storm that had torn everything apart. But there was still something beautiful about the calm that followed. A peace, fragile and tentative, but real. I poured the coffee, the warm steam curling up into the air, and I set 2 cups on the table, one for me, one for Mary. It had become a ritual. I would always make 2 cups of coffee, just like I used to, even when she wasn't awake yet. Even when I knew it would be a long while before things felt normal again. When Mary came downstairs, her hair tangled from sleep and her eyes still heavy with the weight of everything, she gave me a small smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that we were still here, still together. We hadn't been broken, not completely. I didn't sleep much last night, she said, sitting down at the table. But I'm all right. I nodded, reaching across the table to take her hand. I know you are. You're stronger than you think, Mary. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes searching mine, as though looking for reassurance she didn't need to ask for. And in that moment, I realized something. She didn't need me to protect her anymore. She had already started to rebuild herself, to heal in ways I couldn't see. She was growing, stronger with every day. Mom, she said softly, squeezing my hand in return. I'm so sorry. I blinked, confused. Sorry? For what? For not seeing it sooner. For not realizing what he was doing. Her voice cracked, but she steadied herself. I should have known, Mom. I should have trusted you more. I squeezed her hand tighter, my heart aching. Sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. You were living your life, loving the man you thought you knew. None of this is your fault. But I should have. No, I interrupted, my voice firm. You shouldn't have. You did nothing wrong. He was the one who lied, who manipulated. You were the victim here, not him. Mary nodded, though I could see the doubt still lingering in her eyes. She had always been the kind to carry the weight of everything on her shoulders, even when it wasn't hers to bear. But I wasn't going to let her carry this. Not anymore. We sat in silence for a moment, the warmth of the coffee filling the space between us, the sound of the birds outside, a soft melody that seemed to calm the storm in my heart. The years of tension, the guilt, the fear, all seemed to dissipate with each passing second, replaced by something softer. Something that felt more like healing than pain. Finally, Mary took a deep breath, her fingers wrapping around her cup. You know, I've been thinking a lot. About everything. I met her eyes, urging her to go on. I don't know what the future holds, Mom. I don't know if I'll ever feel fully okay again. But I know this, I'm not going to let him win. I'm not going to let what he did to me define who I am. Tears sprang to my eyes, though I fought to keep them at bay. I'm proud of you, Mary. So proud. She smiled at me, a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. It wasn't a perfect smile, but it was hers. It was the start of something new, and as I sat there with her, my heart lightened for the first time in so long. I had spent so many years trying to protect her, trying to fix everything, that I'd forgotten something important. She was strong enough to fix herself. She had the power to heal, to rise above the hurt. I didn't have to shield her anymore, and maybe, just maybe, we both could find peace in the quiet mornings that followed the storm. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling the warmth spread through me, and let out a long breath. The past wasn't gone, and the scars would never fade completely. But for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that the future was ours to build. Together, the months passed after the trial. And the quiet settled in again, a new kind of peace that wasn't quite like the one before. We were rebuilding, not just the house, but our lives, piece by piece. There were still hard days, days when the weight of what had happened would hit out of nowhere, days when the memories threatened to pull us under. But those days grew fewer and fewer, and slowly, the light began to break through. I had always thought that life would be one smooth road, full of joy, love, and safety. But it wasn't. It was a path with twists and turns, a path where even the people we trust most can betray us. And in the wake of that betrayal, we can either crumble, or we can rise up and rebuild. I learned that the hard way. That even the most shattered parts of us can heal, if we let them. That forgiveness, while important, doesn't always mean accepting everything that's happened. It means finding peace within ourselves, despite the chaos that others might bring into our lives. As I sit here now, watching the sun rise through the kitchen window, the warmth of the light on my face feels like the first real breath I've taken in years. I know that Mary is still healing, and I know that I am, too. We're both learning how to trust again, not just others, but ourselves. And the most important thing I've realized through all of this is that we are stronger than we ever knew. We are resilient. The road ahead won't always be easy. It won't always be smooth. But what I've learned from this journey is that the people we love, the people who truly love us back, are worth fighting for. The love between mother and daughter, the love between a family, is a bond that can never be broken. And no one, no matter how hard they try, can take that away from us. Mary and I have both had to let go of the past in order to move forward. But we're doing it together. And that's enough. So, to anyone who's ever been through something similar, who feels like they can't go on, who feels lost in the hurt and the pain, I want you to know, you are stronger than you think. The road might be long, but the sun always rises, even after the darkest nights, and above all, remember, you are not alone. You can rebuild. You can heal, and you will. Before you go, tell me, where are you watching from? And if my story helped you, give it a 5 and subscribe. It means the world to me. Take care of yourselves, and remember, the power to heal is always within you. The sun is setting now, casting its soft, golden light across the kitchen, just like it has for so many years. It's peaceful here, finally. After everything, I'm learning to appreciate these quiet moments, moments where I can just be present, without the weight of the past constantly on my shoulders. Life feels a little lighter now, though I know there's still work to do. I think about Mary often, how much she's grown, how much she's changed, and how she's finally starting to take back control of her life. Every day, she takes one more step toward healing, toward becoming the woman she was always meant to be. And as her mother, I couldn't be prouder, but I'm learning, too. I'm learning that it's okay to let go of the past. It's okay to move forward, to trust again, and to live a life full of joy and peace, even after everything we've been through. We're both doing it, step by step, together, and if you're listening to my story now, I want you to know one thing: no matter what you've been through, no matter how heavy the world feels, you can start over. You can rebuild. You can find the peace you deserve. And most importantly, you don't have to do it alone. If this story helped you, if you feel like it spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you. Please, take a moment to hit that subscribe button, turn on the little bell so you won't miss any updates, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. And if it meant something to you, please give it a rating of 5. Your support means the world to me. Thank you for being part of this journey with me, for listening, and for letting me share this chapter of our lives with you. I hope it gave you some comfort, some strength, and most of all, some hope. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and keep fighting for the life you deserve.